Okay, so this video is going to be kind of a hardcore theory-driven technique video that's specifically geared towards kind of people who are doing a lot of debating on the internet, and especially people who do things like call-in shows. That we're going to talk about a specific technique that is useful when you're encountering people who you're asking them a question and they keep giving you non-answers, and how do you break that down? So for the people who love to watch me like humiliate people on the internet, I love you, but this video is kind of not for you. It's really for those people. This is a technique video, so let's get into it.
Mr. Anderson.
Hello, my name is Mr. Anderson, and I am mean to people on the internet. I'm always very polite about it, though. I just tend to ask difficult questions and insist on the answers. That shouldn't be a big surprise because I am, in fact, a lawyer. My channel's got a lot of stuff to do with debate. I do a lot of debate technique breakdowns, which is what you're going to be looking at here, and I post a bunch of my own debates as well, so that you can see that what I say you should do actually works. And I also do reviews of other people's debates, so if you're interested in that and maybe you're a debater, you can certainly contact me on my email, and we can set up something. But today what we're going to be talking about is a specific technique with respect to situations where somebody is just straight up not giving you an answer. You're asking a very clear, very specific question, and they're deliberately not answering it. They're just kind of saying whatever their talking point is, and just repeating that over and over. And what happens a lot, especially in call-in shows, is that first the person will repeat the question, and then if the person doesn't, then they will yell at them and repeat the question. And then if they still don't answer it, what they will do is they will mute that person and then repeat the question. If they still don't answer it, then they'll hang up. And it's some kind of a flex, right? But it's not the best, because you probably had a point. You probably had somewhere you wanted to go, and now you haven't been able to get there because you haven't been able to break down that resistance. So the way around having to do it that way is that you start by asking the question. If they give a response that doesn't really answer the question, then Old Faithful, and the first thing that you should do in general whenever you're asking somebody questions and they don't answer it, is just ask the question again, right? Just repeat the question, and call them out on it and say, that's interesting. It's not it's not responsive to the question I'm asking you. I'm asking you a simple question. The question is this, right? If that doesn't work, then option two is, go break that question down into smaller pieces where it will, they'll look really stupid if they don't answer those questions, because now they're even simpler. And that's sort of, option two. But that's not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is the third line of attack, which is if they still won't answer the question, then what you do is you say, look, we both know the answer to this question because it's a simple question. We both know the answer is, and it's kind of whatever is worse for them, the worst answer, right? And so you say, look, I know you're not answering this question. I think we both know that the answer is this. And it seems to me that you don't want to answer that question because you don't like the answer that you're going to have to give. So you're trying to avoid answering it. So I'm going to ask you one more time. If you don't answer the question, then I'm going to assume I'm right. I'm going to assume you know the answer, and you know the answer is this. And then if they don't answer the question again, then you can say, okay, so you know it's this then. So now, based on that, my question is this. Right? And that'll often cause a, whoa, wait, that's not what I said. Well, fine. Then what is the answer? If it's not that, right? So let me give you an example. I had a debate a little while ago, and I asked the person, I was like, so you know what, begging the question is. You know what that is, right? And he said, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, look, I asked you, that's not what I asked you. I asked you if you knew what begging the question was. And he goes, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter what he said. And then I said, okay, so you do, right? I kind of jumped to the end, right? Because that one's so clear. I was like, so you do. So you know what begging the question is. So what I'm telling you is that all I've heard from you today is you begging the question, and that's a problem. So, if you have any, responses to what we've been talking about that's not begging the question, then let's do that. Otherwise, we're running to the end, right? And so in that way, I was able to get my point out. My point was, look, you're begging the question, and if you don't stop doing that, we're done here. But he would have stymied that if I hadn't been able to just say, look, we both know that the reason that you're not answering that question is because you do know what begging the question is, right? If you didn't, I would tell you, but you do. Now that works beyond those sorts of very basic situations. Like, let's say, for example, you were running a call-in show, and you were asking the person, show me some evidence that God exists, right? And the person starts talking about, well, it's going to take a long time for me to tell you those things, and are you going to even accept that evidence if I do, and blah 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 blah. It's like, first thing you do now is you got to break it down into smaller questions. So, okay, do you have any evidence that God exists, right? Make it a yes or no question if you can. Do you have any evidence that God exists? I don't want to know what it is yet. I just want to know whether it exists, whether you have it. And by evidence, I don't mean arguments, I don't mean theories, I mean hard evidence. Do you have any hard evidence? And they'd start talking about theories and transcendental blah, 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 right? And it's like, okay, so I'm going to assume then that if you did have hard evidence, that you would have told me clearly that you do. So the fact that you're evading this question makes it painfully clear to me that you do not have hard evidence. So I'm going to ask you one more time if you have any hard evidence. And by hard evidence, I mean facts, things that you can show me that are going to slot into your arguments. And then you can make your arguments. Right now, before I hear your arguments, I want to know whether they're going to be just arguments or whether they're going to have hard evidence. So for the last time, do you have hard evidence, facts that support the existence of God, right? And then they'll probably go blah, 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 blah. Arguments are evidence, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter, right? Okay, so I think it's very clear then that you don't have hard evidence. So, now I've got to make a decision about whether or not I want to hear your arguments, and then you can make that decision, right? But, now you've clarified and you've kind of got it on record, essentially, that they don't have hard evidence, even though they won't admit it, right? Because you've done something in legal terms. What we would call this is drawing an adverse inference, right? Where by virtue of the fact that they have refused to answer that question, you draw an inference that the answer is bad for them, right? And that's something that you are permitted to do in court. And sometimes you'll do it with a whole witness. Like, let's say if a prosecutor, for example, refuses to call the main eyewitness, then the defense can ask for an adverse inference that witness's testimony was going to be decidedly unhelpful to the prosecution, right? And that's why we have things like the presumption of innocence, where the defendant's not required to testify in a criminal trial, because you're not allowed to draw an adverse inference against a defendant. It's the one instance where you're not allowed to do that. But where a witness is under the control of a party and they don't call them, then you can ask for an adverse inference to be drawn. And applied to this situation, when a question is asked and the person refuses to answer it, an adverse inference can be reasonably drawn that the answer is going to be harmful to them. And so I suggest that that's what you do when the person simply refuses to answer a question. Just draw an adverse inference and see how they deal with that. All right, that's it. Talk to you later.